Hey guys, welcome back to the video. I'm Luke, a CFA Charterholder, and in today's video we're going to be contrasting companies that have concentrated ownership structures with companies that have dispersed ownership structures. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so the corporate issuers section of the material splits up ownership structures into two distinct camps. So we have companies that have concentrated ownership structures and companies that have dispersed ownership structures. So quite simply, a concentrated ownership structure is one where there's a small number of shareholders that own the vast majority of the shares. So it's a company that maybe has the founder, maybe a large venture capital or private equity firm that own the majority of the shares. That's really quite simply what a concentrated ownership structure represents. So a small number of shareholders that own the majority of the shares in the company. And then in contrast, the dispersed ownership structure is one where the shareholding is spread out amongst many different shareholders. So this is a kind of company where there's not one dominant shareholder that owns 60, 70, 80% of the shares, or 2, 3, 4 shareholders that cumulatively own 70, 75% of the shares. There's no prevailing controlling shareholder who owns a large number of the company's shares. A concentrated ownership structure is one where there's one or a few dominant shareholders that own material amounts within the company, and a dispersed ownership structure is one where there's no clear dominant shareholder that owns a material amount of shares within the company. So let's just look at a very quick example to make this super clear. So we have a company with a concentrated ownership structure. One shareholder owns 70% of the shares, and the remaining 30% of the shareholding is shared out amongst many other different shareholders. So the 70% shareholder is able to exercise control over the company because they own the majority of the shares. If they own over 50% of the company, they have control over the direction of the firm. Whereas the minority shareholders, so all of the shareholders that own less than 30% of the firm, all the shareholders that sit within that bucket, would have more limited rights. Majority shareholders always have greater rights and protections than minority shareholders. So the 70% shareholder in this example would be described in the curriculum as the controlling shareholder, and as I said, can exercise control over the strategic direction of the company. And concentrated ownership structures are more common when the business is still majority owned by the founders, another company, so it's been acquired, or is owned by the government, so it's state controlled. So if we're looking at the ownership structure, we're basically saying that this 70% is owned by one shareholder, and then that shareholder has control over the strategic direction of the company, the selection of the board of directors, whereas the remaining 30%, which is owned by the minority shareholders, who have much less say in terms of direction of the company because they don't have control of the firm. And then a company that has a dispersed ownership structure is basically the opposite. In this example, we've got a firm where there's 100 different shareholders and each owns 1% each. My illustration doesn't do that justice, but I think you get the point. Each shareholder, so that would be shareholder 1, shareholder 2, etc., etc. So no shareholder has control over the company. No shareholder can dominate board meetings and have majority sway over the direction of the company. Each shareholder is considered a minority shareholder. There's no dominant owner of the business who overpowers the other shareholders in the ownership structure. So that's concentrated ownership and dispersed ownership structures in a nutshell. That comes up in the corporate issuers section of the material. Hopefully that was all clear. Any questions, feel free to fire them off in the comments. See you guys in the next video.